Valid point. Yeah. Good. You get both angles, multi-angled viewing. Yeah. Okay, one thing to mention. A lot of you have downloaded the Front Conference app, but not many of you are actually using it. We need you to go and look at the sessions, and then make sure you have to just register quickly. It doesn't take you very long, and it will allow you to rate the sessions you've seen so far. Let us know what was your thing, what wasn't so much your thing, and give us a good idea of like the talks you like for future events. It's good to do it now, so that while you still remember the talks that you saw this morning as well, and then you can carry on using it tomorrow, and that would be great. So our final talk of the day in here. We are continuing with the British contingent, as you have me, you have Peter, and now you have Phil. And Phil's a developer evangelist for Twilio. My brief summary of Twilio, I'm not going to be on their marketing team anytime soon, would be the ones that make it easy to do phone stuff on the web. Does that do the trick?
Yeah. Good, yeah.
And so, I mean, the way that we're nowadays, the way we're using our devices, the way we're switching so frequently between networks and different contexts, we really need to have that kind of offline functionality to give us a bit more flexibility with the things that we're doing. So here is Phil, who's going to tell you how to build a web application offline first from the ground up in his talk, Thinking Offline. Please give him a little round of applause.
Thank you very much, Laura. And thank you to all of you. Thank you for coming and joining us up here. I assume you've come for the talk and not just to be close to the bar when it opens, once this is done. And yes, I realize I am standing between you and beer, wine, or a soft drink of your choice. So I will make this swift. As Laura said, my name is Phil Nash, and I am a developer evangelist for Twilio. We like to say that Twilio is a cloud communications platform to allow you to build communications between your users using the tools, languages, and frameworks that you already know. But obviously, we're not here to talk about that. If you do want to talk about that, find me at any time over the next couple of days, or find me online at these places. We are here, in fact, to talk about thinking offline. Who here is... Don't worry about it. So who here has heard about a service worker API? A few people, and we have some hands still down, so that means I get to give you a quick introduction to service workers. This won't take long, because service workers are simply scripts that intercept network requests, so that web developers like ourselves can treat the web as an enhancement, treat the network, in fact, as an enhancement, and provide an offline experience for users of web applications. But I was actually thinking about this earlier today, and I realized I'm slightly wrong about this, because offline is a technology in a way, and even if you were in the last talk with Peter, technology is not the end goal. The end goal is an experience. And I'm talking about experiences here, but really, I don't think it's about necessarily being an offline experience, but being a better experience. Service workers allow us as web developers to create better experiences for users of our platform. And we're going to talk about how to do that and how to think through building these things ourselves today. I want to start, though, quickly with that demo of a service worker, because I'm going to go ahead and try and build you one right now. No, I'm not. I'm going to do that a bit later. Sorry. What I'm going to start with is a really good example of what I think is a great experience. And I'm just going to turn the internet off for this particular demo, because this is Jake Archibald's offline Wikipedia. And what it's great at is doing the same thing as Wikipedia, but as you just saw, I turned my Wi-Fi off. These are not internet cables that are connected to my laptop right now, but I am still able to kind of go and view these pages that I have kind of ticked as read offline. I can go to what cloud communications is, because apparently there's a whole Wikipedia article about that. And you can go to voice over IP, or you can't because it's actually not worked. And it's offline, right? But we can then load this in the background, and it'll do that, and it'll notify me when I'm ready. And this, I think, is just a great example of an application that works really nicely offline. And you can see you've got these articles that are cached. Apparently, there we go, voice over IP is actually available offline. But this is just a really great experience, because if you I know, it's always the thing that comes to my mind is if you're on a train and you go through a tunnel and you're browsing something, and either you get kicked off and you try and go to, let's say, Facebook, for example, because they have taken over everything. But you get this little guy, right? You get the dinosaur of disappointment. You set him off running because that's all you can do now because you're offline. But I'm really here to try and kill this dinosaur, not simply by running him into a cactus, but by making these experiences better for users. So let's go back over here. And this is all empowered by this new API, the service worker. And we're going to see how that works in just a sec. And this is my favorite way to talk about it because it is worth explosions and fireworks and excitement. And in fact, there is an entire video dedicated to bigging up the service worker that ends with this explosion. And I encourage you to go and check that out. So let's make everything offline? Maybe not. It doesn't necessarily need that kind of thing. It's down to your use case. But I believe that many of the things I'm going to talk about today are useful in most applications at some point, and you can make use of that. I said in the abstract for this that I've been building a non-trivial application in order to work out all the questions I had with offline-capable applications and how to build with them. And this is that application, or a screenshot of that application. As I said, I work for Twilio. We have an SMS API, and this is me building an SMS application based in the browser. It actually looks kind of app-like. I've used Material Design Lite there to make it feel a bit at home on an Android like this. And it's fairly simple. You send and receive text messages. That's all it does. But I'm going to show you a couple of bits with that. I'm going to show some other examples along the way. But I do have a confession about that, because I said in the abstract there was a web application that was built from the ground up as offline first. And that turned out to be a lie, because I built it as web first. And then I was able, more excitingly, to enhance it, to build on top of that using progressive enhancement in order to make these features work for this application offline. So what that really told me was you don't have to, if you are looking to take advantage of the service worker, if you're looking forward to taking advantage of progressive web applications, as has been mentioned today as well, then you do not necessarily need to rebuild your app from scratch. That's a waste of time in most cases, or an awful big waste of money anyway. We can progressively enhance these, and that is truly exciting to me. So what do we need? What do we need in order to provide an excellent offline experience? I think there's kind of four things. We need a base experience, and this is that application that you've already built, that web application that is already out there, already online, and people are already using. You need to do something with those static assets, because there are files that we've built, our CSS, our JavaScript, that aren't changing that often, depending on how often you do deploy your front end of your website. We need to do something with making those pages offline, the actual content of the site. And then finally, background sync is a very exciting little feature that I can't wait to show you near the end of this talk. So the base experience. Good news. I can already tell, because you're here at an excellent web-based conference, that you've already built an excellent base experience. You've already made a good website out there. You know that in your hearts, and you're learning more about stuff now, which is even better. So, as I said with my example, we can progressively enhance these things. You already have your base experience. You already know what you're dealing with. And hopefully that is somewhat of a speedy experience. If it already hopefully is performant, responsive, and has an excellent user experience. I hope that's the case. So well done, everyone. We've already got that one nailed. So static assets. What are we going to do with these static assets? We don't want to be downloading them from the server every time, because if we're doing that, we're using the network. The network for us should be that enhancement. And this is where we come to our second demo. So I'm going to show you this, my very, very simple offline page. QuickTime is going to... We'll come back to that later. This is my very simple offline page. It is a single-page application, i.e. there is one page. No JavaScript, it's fine. Well, none yet, anyway. And it just works. And if I kill its server, which is here, it will die. And that's a real shame. But we can change that. and bring it back. There we go. And we can change that, not with my starting text like that, but by installing ourselves a service worker. And so this is the HTML for that page. And do shout if you can't read what's going on, because I'm just going to type for a little bit. Because the service worker is really easy to install. It's a very simple API based on the navigator object, as you might expect. And in order to install a service worker, which is just that extra little bit of JavaScript, in my case, mine's called sw.js, you just need to call register like that. And a lot of things in service workers rely on promises in order to deal with the asynchronous nature of it. And so once that service worker has been installed, you will get a resolved promise in which you can celebrate. Can't spell yay. That's a good sign. And if something goes wrong in that installation, you can catch that problem and probably deal with it in a way that's better than this. Of course, we are building ourselves a progressive enhancement here. So what happens if it fails to install is that your user gets to use your website as intended. So that's fine. And so that's all we need to do in order to register this service worker. And actually, there are new, easier ways of coming to register a service worker. It's currently behind a flag in Chrome Canary, in which you can just use a link in the head of the document, or even a link header in the HTTP response. But that's still a little bit experimental right now, so I won't go into it. And so what we need to do is do something with this SW.js file. And I'm just going to start by coming up with a cache name, FEC16, and we'll see that used in a bit. Because the service worker itself goes through a few stages and basically spends the entire time listening for events. Because the service worker actually runs outside of the context of the page that's installing it, you don't really get to directly interact with it. It just listens for events from things like fetch, but firstly, install. The install event is the thing that will fire as soon as you've downloaded the service worker to the browser and it's ready to get going. And we're going to do something with that install event because we want to, at this point, cache those static assets. That's what we're after here. And what I'm going to do is just use event and wait until. And wait until is a new thing for event objects for contexts like this, in which the service worker could kind of conceivably be killed at any point. But if we're doing something with it, we don't want it to get killed. So we tell the browser, just wait, just let us finish this bit. And we pass to that a promise. And in that promise, we can do some stuff. So I'm just going to open up a cache using that cache name that we made. And that returns a promise. So in our then, we are going to get that cache out. And the caches API is available in both the service worker and actually inside the page as well. I caught myself there, but if you find me talking about the front end at all, this is all in the front end, but if I mean the page in the front end, this ends up being the middle end to me, which isn't really an end, I guess. But, I'll deal with that. And so within this promise, we're going to return another promise in which we're going to add all of our static assets to the cache. You can individually add things to the cache, but in this case, we're waiting for a success from the result of this in order to say that we are happily installed. So if we use cache to add all, it will wait for all of the things to get installed into the cache, and then it will return a successful response. And so I'm just going to put in index.html and app.css. It's rather a grand title for the CSS file there. It's hardly an app, but we'll go with it. And then we need to do just one other thing, because once we've put that stuff into the cache, we need to be able to get it out again. And in this case, when your browser and when your page makes a request to the network, to anywhere on the network, regardless of it being on your domain or elsewhere, the service worker will respond with will receive a fetch event, and that will have some stuff to it as well. And in this case, we're not going to use wait until. We're not waiting for anything. We actually want to respond to that fetch request. So we respond with. And we can respond with a couple of things. There is a response object in this whole API. And you could do that, and it would just respond with hello. We wouldn't even look anything up in the cache. And that's not particularly useful for us. So what we will do is attempt to match against the request that we made inside all of our caches. And we only have one right now, but that's what we're going to do. If we just return that, that is going to return a promise that will resolve with with the response. And since this website only asks for 2 files, index.html and app.css, I'm fairly confident it's going to respond with that. So if I go ahead and refresh this page, you can see inside the DevTools on the right-hand side of the screen for you that we have Service Worker JavaScript now activated and running. And we'll talk about activated and what that means in a bit. But what this means is I can go ahead and kill that server and refresh the page. And I promise you I'm refreshing. We see yay in the bottom, and we got the installs, and the site still works. We are offline. And that is the simplest possible version of that. And so I'm pretty happy that worked all right. But don't worry about that. But this brings us to a question, really, because we can go ahead and try and change something in our site. We might be, wondering at this point, what time is the party? I hope you're not wondering that, but you never know, you never know. But if I refresh this, then we don't get anything out of that because we have cached those two pages. Actually, we can go and we can see those. This is our cache storage down here. And those are the 2 files we cached. And the original one said front-end conf.rox. And we're always responding with that file. So this takes us into the interesting part of the service worker life cycle. It has a great lifestyle. It just sits there waiting for stuff. Just does it when you ask for it. But it has a life cycle as well. It's pretty chill. It's all right. And as we already saw, it goes through a couple of events, installing where that install event is fired. And once that completes successfully, then it is installed, and it's happy about that. But at this point, it is not yet in control of the page, and will still not receive other events from it, because it then has to go through the activating event. At that point, you will receive another event inside the service worker, which you can respond with, called activate. Or you can ignore it, it's fine. We ignored it in this case at the moment, but we'll sort that out in a minute. Because once that's done, it's activated. And there is a potential that if another service worker takes over instead, or something else goes wrong, then it will end up redundant. We don't need to worry about a redundant one, really. We're really looking into the activated ones. Because once a service worker is activated for a page, it doesn't like to let go. It is in control of that page. And that is so that the experience of the page for anybody using it like that doesn't get mixed up. If suddenly a new service worker took over with new JavaScript and things like that, you could break the website for your users. So we need to do some cache invalidation for our cached resources that we've done already. We also need to show how to take over for the new service worker. So we've changed our HTML page. We now need to do a couple of other things. Firstly, I'm going to change the cache name. This is a good start for making a new service worker. And then we're going to listen to that activate event. Because when the service worker activates, it's going to do some clearing up. It's going to remove our old caches that we no longer want and leave us with our existing cache, our desired cache, which is now FE16.2. So once more in this particular case, we are going to tell the service worker to wait until something's dealt with, and we're going to go clear those things up. So we're going to call off to caches.keys, which returns all the names of the caches that we currently have in our cache. So we're going to get some names out of that. That comes back with that returns a promise. So we carry on with then, and then we're going to just wrap the rest of this in promise.all, which is pretty useful because we're going to go through the names and filter out the one that we all of the ones except the one we want. So we're just going to return things like, name is not equal to the cache name that we actually want right now. So we're just getting rid of the old ones. That's the filter. We're then going to map over those, name each this time, and we'll return caches.delete. And we're going to delete that name. And caches.delete also returns a promise. So that map will return an array of promises to promise to all, and when all the things are cached, all the things from the cache are removed, then we are done, and the activated event then is successful. Cool. So if I go back to our page and refresh it again, let's go check out our service workers tab here. we should see a new service worker get installed. And it failed, probably. I have probably not started the server, you're absolutely right. Brilliant, thank you very much for that. This time we should see a new service worker install, and now it's waiting to activate. As I said, it doesn't just instantly take over, because that might break our experience. We are waiting to activate. And the natural way for a service worker to activate is for us to close all types of that page, and then eventually go back to it some of the time and visit it. And we should find what time is the party. So our new service worker is activated and is running. We'll find in our cache storage here we have our new cache, FEC16.2 there. And that is the service worker taking over like that. There are other ways to do this, though, and you might have seen, I'm not going to change anything but the service worker in this case, so we won't see a change on the page, but as you can see, we've got this waiting to activate and skip waiting here. And so if I just go back to the slides for a second, because there's a lot more code, which I'm definitely not going to write, inside our registration, this is our original registration on the actual page, the front end, as I like to call it, we can do some more stuff. We can listen to that registration, and if we find there's an update, that is, there is a new service worker trying to install, then we can do stuff with that. In fact, we can listen for that one to be ready to be activated as well. So you can listen to the state change event, and when that state change event goes off, if the worker is now installed, we can maybe go tell the worker to do something. And this is where that skip waiting comes in. In fact, the service worker itself has a method, skip waiting, which will allow it to replace the existing service worker. And then you can also listen for that happening as well. And if you listen to the service worker object itself for a controller change, you can know that a new controller, a new service worker, has taken control. And then you can do something like maybe reload the page, or maybe just notify the user somehow that their site their app has been updated, and if they want to refresh, they can and get the latest stuff. And so if you do just skip waiting, it just takes control. We didn't change anything else, but that's now. We didn't change anything else. So we've got FE16.3 now. That's correct. So it's taken over. It's got rid of the old stuff, and it is ready to go. Cool. That is so that allows us to take back control from the network over these static assets, certainly in this case, and we are able to deal with that life cycle how we want to and when we want to. So let's move on to dealing with the pages of our site, the pages of our application, and how they would work offline. And to me, it's very much a conflict between data and files. And actually, I've spoken about this before once, and it was then much more succinctly put in a blog post recently by Adi Osmani, in which he said, for URL addressable resources, use the cache API. For all other data, use IndexedDB. Very straightforward, very nice and easy. And that article is great. It's a great read. It's full of resources on both the cache API and database storage. And so I don't know if anyone's used IndexedDB before. At all? Not much at all. Okay, a couple. Was it a good experience? that's not entirely sure. Yeah, I mean, it's got a horrifying-looking API, I think, at times. It's got a bunch of weird callbacks. It was invented before promises really took off, and it's not the greatest. It also has some bugs in some older versions of Safari, most notably, which you'd need to know about to get around. So I'm not going to advocate necessarily using the IndexedDB API straight away. In fact, we have some wonderful libraries for that kind of thing. Behind this one is Jake Archibald, IDB Promises, which keeps the same API as IndexedDB, but wraps the functions, wraps the callbacks in a much more friendly promises nature, and you'll find him talking about that. There's Local Forage, which was Mozilla's attempt to recreate the local storage API, but asynchronously into IndexedDB. It's great, but it's actually oddly large. Comes in at, I think, 24K minified 8K gzipped or something like that. And if you are only supporting kind of really, really modern browsers, then also by Jake Archibald, although extracted out of Gaia, I think, the old Firefox OS, is IDB keyval, which minifies and gzips down to about 0.5K and gives you a key value storage layer over the top of IndexedDB itself. And then getting a bit more closer to to a nicer experience and the existing API and how it works is Dexy. And finally, PouchDB is I think it's a great thing. It's a big library because it effectively implements CouchDB in IndexedDB, including the sync protocol, which means it's very useful if you're using CouchDB on the server as well, as that makes the browser simply become one part of a distributed database. And it does all the syncing and all that kind of stuff for you. I'm going to just dive quickly into Dexy today, as that's the thing that I've picked up to start using in order to offline my messages application. And like I said, it follows the IndexedDB API quite closely, although it makes for some niceties as well. So IndexedDB allows you to version your database because we need to not just recreate new databases every time somebody loads our page, and we also need to bring up to scratch anybody who's never seen this database before. And so in this particular case, version 1 is just going to create one table in that database, in this case messages. The ++ means it's got an auto-incrementing and hidden ID, and also a created at index. You can actually throw anything else you want into this now. Those are just the indices. And so you can go and add stuff in. Everything in IndexedDB gets wrapped in a transaction, which is useful. And you just you open up the transaction, you take the table that you want to use in that transaction, or multiple tables if that's what you need, and then you just, within the transaction, you can use those tables, and in this case, put just adds in an object. This is one of my messages, as a from number, a to number, the created at, which is a date, and the body, which I've usefully used as service work as a rock right now. And that also responds with promises. So when that successfully enters the database, we get an excellent resolve of the promise, and if it fails, we can catch and deal with that. And similarly, for reading back from that database, you can get things out by you open up the transaction the same, and in this case, you get a list of items out and render it somehow. I'm not going to go into how you render things. I have not been using many different frameworks in order to try and deal with this. You're up to your own devices when it comes to rendering things onto a page. But I do insist, I guess, that you render on the server first. This is something I think all the large front-end frameworks are looking into. Ember calls it fast boot, I think, which is, I guess, ironic. It was fast before you added Ember. I don't know. But rendering on the server gets HTML to the screen, to the users, before anything else can. So I recommend you do that and get that HTML up there. And then once you've done that, you can use that to put all the messages, in this case, into a database. And then this is where we come to the application shell architecture. And if you were at Tim Cadleck's talk earlier, he mentioned this briefly as pretty cool for performance. In the app shell is basically the idea of taking that the application and stripping away everything that doesn't matter to the user except for that kind of interface that you're going to see first, and throwing that into the service worker as well. And then for any HTML request to the service worker, just respond with this application shell, and then have JavaScript on that page to check out the URL, find out what's supposed to be there, fetch it out of the database, and fill in all the gaps. And so your JavaScript is going to need to be able to either bootstrap from the page itself, from that rendered HTML, or indeed the database if it's in the app shell nature. I think some people like to call this universal JavaScript. I think Angular Universal is their idea of rendering on the server and then dealing with it in the browser as well. You don't actually have to use one of those big frameworks in order to make an offline application work. You don't even need to make it a single page application, because you can keep just reloading this app shell and filling in the pages from the service worker every time somebody tries to navigate. So with that, we actually get a really performant site, because that app shell is loaded really quickly out the service worker, and then the JavaScript can get to work and fill in the rest of the gaps with anything from the database. You can also store other kind of fragments of HTML off in the cache, which you can then fill in other bits of the site, which may be a little bit more static than the data. And that is how we're going to make our pages work offline. And finally, we come to, as I said, one of my favorite parts of this background sync. And this really requires a demo, as long as I can get my phone to continue to stay on the cable here. Bear with me 1 second whilst we just open that up. This is the point where I hope my friends stop WhatsApping for a moment, because they have been all day. And I'm going to go over here. And this is my SMS application running locally right now. And this is just a conversation I've been having with myself. I do that a lot. And we remain offline, as you can see. We are still on the Wi-Fi. And I'm just going to send myself a message. Hello from Front Conf. I'm going to send that away right now. And so the thing's told me it's sent. This is perhaps a bad choice in the UI for myself, but it's sort of technically it's sent. Of course, we haven't. It's not gone anywhere yet. We don't have an internet connection. But what we can go and look at is IndexedDB. And we have a message outbox. This is my table in here. And in there we have the message I was trying to send and the number I was trying to send it to. And what's great about this is because I can then go online. And what you should see on my phone is that the message eventually gets sent through to me. There we are, a message. I was about to use the screen to go into that, but that was not going to work. So hello from Front Conf, and we can then go and refresh. Oops, don't clear that. We'll refresh that again, and we'll find DevTools. If we refresh the entire browser, we'll then find that that is an empty table because we cleared it out. And this is how that works. All you need to do in the absolute front end, in the page where you make that action happen, is to register for a sync event. And you can check on the service worker registration if you have access to that sync event, because it actually only exists in Chrome since version 49. And you can register for that sent message tag on that. And then in the service worker itself, you can listen for those sync events. A sync event happens when the browser deems itself back online after being away for some time. If you are, in fact, online at the time you register a sync event, it will fire almost immediately. And then you do the thing. You can actually check for the existence on event.tag. You can check for the existence of this tag and see, like, am I supposed to send a message at this point? Am I supposed to do something else? But this is really useful if you want to allow your users to do something on a page and get on with their day. They don't need to care about whether it completed. They want to send a message. If I send an SMS with the SMS app on my iPhone, then I tend to put it in my pocket before the loading bar is done. And that's what I want to see with this as well. This is the exact same as that. And you can see it in use for any of those kind of post and get on with your life kind of situations in which you can, the user just wants to get on with it. You can, of course, deal with your own kind of time to live on these messages, and if it's gone 4 hours later, maybe this message is no longer relevant. Maybe that angry forum post that you were trying to send whilst in a tunnel is no longer important, and you can display that back to the user somehow and maybe allow them to change their mind. You also obviously need to deal with some other UI stuff, such as if there are other failures within the service worker. Again, I would probably, in this case, use that message outbox IndexedDB table to feed an outbox section of the website, which is then full of messages that are waiting to send. You can show errors in there and anything else like that. So I do have a little confession, because I love the web, and that's not the confession. Hopefully you do too. I love it with sparkly hearts, that much. But I literally just last week published my first iOS app. Sorry. But I haven't really talked about support for this or any of these features recently, and I'm sorry about that. But it's actually quite good. There's good news for this because the support is strong. In Chrome, Firefox, Opera, and if you don't recognize the fancy purple one there, that is the Samsung Internet Browser, available on all your Samsung Android devices. Sounds like a tiny thing, but apparently it is 10% of mobile traffic on Android goes through that browser, because they take your Chrome away. You can only use it on a Samsung, but that is still a significant portion these days. So there's obviously some logos missing here, some of the important ones. But what's really exciting is that Edge has this in preview. It is in the Edge preview right now, service worker support, not background sync, but service workers, push notifications, which I haven't touched on today because I don't think they're necessarily necessary for offline things, but that is it's just so exciting. And then Safari is not. Does anybody know anybody in Apple? Can they talk to them? Get this? I don't know. I think there are signs for this in Apple, and this is one of the reasons that I've built an iOS app, is so that I can know how to make an offline capable experience for a user who is using an iPhone, because there are still a few of them around as far as I'm aware. I am one of them. But there is exciting potential in this. Recently, Jake Archibald posted notes of a service workers meeting, and he listed the people that were there and the companies that were there, and there were 3 people present from Apple on the WebKit team. Also, just in WebKit preview, the preview build that you can get these days, that's the slightly less dangerous than nightly build, I think. They're equivalent to Canary. The fetch API, so the replacement and improvement for XML HTTP request, has arrived in WebKit. In WebKit preview. And fetch API is important for service workers, as that is what will go and do some of the other work under the hood during fetch events if you need to go and claim resources at that point. So we are seeing some of these APIs appear. We are seeing people from Apple talking about service workers with other people who deal with them. So it's in preview and Edge. It's maybe coming in Safari, and I think it's super exciting. But in the meantime, if you want to build a quality offline experience for an Apple user, then you probably have to build an app. And that saddens me, but the web will win in the end. So that is thinking offline, and how I think we need to think offline. We need to build our base experience, that thing we already have, that thing you've already done, you excellent developers, you. Sort out our static assets and keep those in the cache API. Remember, the cache API needs to be it can be accessed from the service worker and from the browser, so you can deal with it on either side. And we need to remember the life cycle and how to kill or take over from an existing service worker. We need to store our data, probably in IndexedDB. It's the best place for it. I forgot to mention, but you can't go and use the nice, easy local storage API in the service worker, because the service worker just does not deal with non-asynchronous APIs. And that just kicks out storage, local storage. If you want to deal with something like that, then local forage or IDB keyval is the place to go. And then background sync is just really useful for creating an excellent experience for somebody who's trying to do something and has maybe a flaky or existingly offline connection. And you can just let them get on and do that and get on with their day. So we're going to, together, hopefully treat the network as an enhancement, make excellent experiences for our users, and just blow up the service worker. That's all I have for you this afternoon. Thank you very much for joining me. I have one tiny little plug, if that's okay. I'm just gonna mention it because it is part of my job as a developer evangelist to let you know about good things with Twilio. We are hosting a conference. Today's the 1st. It's the 20th of September in London. All about communications. It's a single day to talk about communications and good user experiences with communications. It's the way we treat our users well. So if you want to come along to Signal, said it's one day in London on the 20th of September. We actually have Peter Gaston speaking there. And if you want to come along and you want to not pay quite as much as everybody else, just use the code PNASH20 for 20% off tickets. I'd love to see you there. We're going to have a great discussion about communications right there. So that is all I've got time for. Thank you. Do we have any questions?
Pause, yeah. Sorry, don't be distracted.
It's a fake, because I get to have 2 then, because I do thank you twice, and so that was all right.
You spelled single wrong on the slide.
Spent what?
Don't worry, it was a bad joke. Any questions, anyone? Nobody's getting a beer until you've asked a question. I've got questions.
You can hear ice coming out and other things like that over there.
It's hard not to chink bottles when you're moving them along the floor. I have a question. So you mentioned at the end there you had a few kind of broad use cases. Is there anyone using this noticeably in the wild at the moment? that you can point to, anyone that you think is
service
doing
workers
it in a
and
good
this
way?
offline stuff. So the examples are the ones that keep getting surfaced by Google because they're pushing for this. And they're pushing for the idea of the progressive web app, which is an offline experience, HTTPS, which you have to have if you're using a service worker, a web manifest file, which is going to create you logos and other things like that, and then some user interaction, something that you encourages Chrome to believe that this user wants to keep using it. At that point, you get an offline application, you get a logo. And so those are the ones they keep talking about. And so Flipkart is the biggest and brightest example of that right now. And if you were in Peter's talk just before this one, then you'll know about it. But what happened with Flipkart was they're an e-commerce store in India, and they closed down their website and directed everybody off to the App Store to say, hey, go download the app. And 4% of people did, and they thought it was a terrible idea, and they lost all their money. And so what they did was they built a progressive web app in place. They have the same experience, a logo on the home screen and things like that, and increased revenue by 70% because over previously, I think, and not over the app, because that was no revenue because nobody installed it. So Flipkart's an excellent example of that. We're seeing other examples that are not quite so good examples because they're kind of like Chrome and Android only things, best viewed in Chrome and Android, which is a bad thing. But it's still big places dealing with that. So the Washington Post is one of those, have created themselves a progressive web app that you can only get if you go to washingtonpost.com/PWA on an Android with Chrome.
Is
it's
that
not the best way to build these things. But
is it due to the nature of the support at the moment? Is that why people are
no,
building
and that's
it
the
that way?
worst thing, because this is an enhancement. If the service worker does not install, you use a website as it was meant to be in the first place without it. And that really annoys me that people would go down this same route of concentrating on a single browser and directing everybody off to something else. If that progressive web app for the Washington Post is a good experience for users of a Chrome on Android, even if they don't get to install the service worker, then it should be a good experience for users of Safari on iOS, and I am disappointed that they haven't gone down that route.
So what kind of use cases would there be then that you think would be a good thing to progressively enhance on top of existing sites?
So that's a good one. One of my favorite examples of that is the Guardian, who on the developer blog, I believe, although they might have rolled it out to the rest of the thing. But if you go to the Guardian developer blog, certainly, and then go offline and try and find yourself on another article, and you're commuting into work and you've gone into a tunnel. It's my favorite example. It's the worst one. But if you do that, instead of getting the dinosaur and having to play with cactuses and low-flying pterodactyls, what you get is a "sorry, you're offline" page, and it's a great little page that says, "Yeah, sorry, you're offline. There's nothing we can do about this right now. But do you want to play a crossword?" And if you do, it opens up a crossword for you. You can then sit there and effectively use the back of the paper whilst you're offline to amuse yourself until you can recover and read another article. I think that's a really good use case of that. I didn't exactly go into it, but in that offline Wikipedia example, which is not obviously a production application, but if you try and navigate to something that's offline, it says you can't do it, but it will go and do that using background sync in order to download that article in the background and then use a notification to tell you about that as well. So there's really good examples of different features that you can pick out of this. And as I said at the start, you can kind of pick and choose the ones you want. You don't have to build an entirely offline application for this. There are just great experiences that we can just pick and choose out of this as well.
Come on, you've got to have some questions after that. What kind of, have you built anything so far using it that you think is particularly is good or had any problems with it?
I am yet to launch this SMS app. It is on GitHub, and you're welcome to go and follow the progress on that. I did just add a static resource caching to my blog, which is on Jekyll using an asset generator. So that was a little bit of a hassle, but I'm going to write about that soon as well because I did it on holiday last week. And in normal life, I tend, in my job as an evangelist, I don't build production applications that much. So sadly, I don't have the full experience like that. But I really like to experiment with all of this.
Well, that's it. We need people to experiment with things to kind of come up with ideas of what's possible, and other people will work on making things production ready, won't they?
Exactly. There are excellent other examples about it as well. what did I want to point out? Actually, Jeremy Keith has written fairly extensively, actually, on how he did his blog on that, and he's done more than just static resource caching. He has an offline fallback page that I don't think has a crossword on it, but is at least helpful, and other kind of. You can go and implement other kind of exciting cache kind of recipes that have been built into HTTP caches for a long time, but you get the control over them. And I think one of his is he uses stale while revalidate, I believe. So instead of just clearing out caches whenever you need to, the browser can go and check if there's a new version of the CSS, check if there's a new thing, and replace it in the cache, which is also quite a sweet use case, and I think also very useful for performance. You can always be kind of almost up to date. And in that case, because you're replacing stuff in the cache, you don't have to invalidate the service worker. It will just continue to use that existing cache.
Yes, so it becomes less about being offline, but as not relying on being online.
Exactly. It is using the network as an enhancement.
Yeah.
And yes, if you have things cached, then they are ready to go at any time. If you have some old data, or yet to be proved not new data, then that is it should be ready to go for a user to use it. There are some people like investigating patterns that include things like notifying a user that this site is now able to be used offline, which I think is I don't think it should be a long-term goal, but is really good for education of users right now as we're getting into this, because you probably don't expect as a user to be able to return to this site, to go and enter a URL into a browser and it work even if you are offline or on a flaky connection or things like that. So there is some kind of notification work going on. I'm not entirely sure about that. Maybe it's a short-term thing whilst we just get into this, and then people can start to expect those experiences.
Yeah, it might not be what we expect in the browser, but it may be something that we expect more from things like hybrid apps and things like that are using the web in the background, maybe going on what kind of Peter was saying as well. And so people who don't understand necessarily the underlying technology, they expect it to function as an app. You're like, why does this app not work if I'm not connected to the internet?
And that's a great example. Like, native applications have all the ability out of the box to be workable offline. If you have a native application that throws an error or just looks sadly at you when you open it up when you're offline or on a bad connection, then that is a native developer who's done something wrong. On the web, until the advent of the service worker, or let's not talk about the application cache, but until the advent of the service worker, you just couldn't do that. But now it is there, and we can start to encourage those behaviors. And that's where the progressive web app and an icon on the home screen that kind of looks like it's an app makes a user feel safe as well.
But we're all sort of going back to this kind of appearance of being an app, being the thing for some reason.
It doesn't have to be an app. It doesn't. There's many kind of myths and things like this. You know, you don't have to build a single-page application in order to use a service worker and become a progressive web app. You don't have to be an app to be a progressive web app.
It makes you that angry.
You just have to try and produce a good experience for your users. I'm sure that's what we all want, and that's what we want of our sites and our applications, depending on where along that boundary you define app and site.
So where would you recommend people go to get started with service worker stuff?
So I've published these slides already on SpeakerDeck. They're at speakerdeck.com/PhilNash. And underneath the slide, there is a good listing of links and examples and introductions if you want to learn more about service worker and a whole bunch of these other features that I've covered today.
Fabulous. Thank you, everyone. A hand. Fantastic.
We have a microphone on its way to you.
We all wake up.
Yeah, I got a question about the size of the cache. How much can I cache using the...
So as far as I'm aware, the cache API will allow you to use up to 20% of the available disk space, which is obviously terrifying, and 5 sites could fill that. But this is still an API that's in its relative infancy. It's been in live browser since January last year, so a year and a half old now, or just over that, 1 and 3 quarters now. And so we are still working out some of those kinks. Of course, there are concerns that you can just kind of take over and fill up somebody's disk, and that's a bad thing. I think one of the things that the browsers are working on is an ability to surface this kind of usage to users in a way that they're going to understand. Because you kind of understand when you installed an application that you can then go and delete and it's gone. And we need to do something similar for that for websites and web applications that use this technology. However, it's still being worked upon. And it is useful when people ask questions like that because it makes the browsers and think about how we're going to deal with this, and they are, I promise you, working on it. But there's not necessarily a solution just yet. In the meantime, be good.
Well, a round of applause to Phil. Thank you for giving us a
Thank you for joining me.
talk.